Jake Kent, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Jake, can you walk us through the journey from realizing that there was a need for Dandy to actually launching the company? What was that process like?
It was a highly personal, very intimate, and vulnerable journey. I'm somebody, my background, we could get more into it, but my career had nothing to do with uh, fertility, had really nothing to do with healthcare, women's health. It wasn't until serendipitous circumstances during COVID, I was living with a family member in unusual living quarters with our in-laws, and she was going through fertility struggles of her own. And I kind of got to bear witness to something that, most of the population never will if you're not personally going through it, which is really, the physical and mental and emotional toll that fertility struggles, which is a broad term, but really the idea of grappling with the uncertainty of whether or not you're going to be able to bring a child into the world, and then the long and winding road that is often required to try and go through fertility treatments, whether that be IVF or other treatment, to realize that dream. And so it was, really firsthand experience watching someone close to me in my life go through it. But more than just grappling with the uncertainty and the vulnerability and the physical and emotional pain of it, I think it was also this idea of like going through that experience without the right resources and without the right support. And, you're kind of looking at this experience, right? Trying to become pregnant, dealing with the reality that you are facing material hurdles to get there, which is hard enough to begin with. I think you layer on top of that asking, women and men and couples and individuals, whoever that person may be, to go through this experience so isolated, so under resourced, so under supported, it creates kind of a whole nother layer of problem for the person going through that. And so that was really the early genesis. It was watching somebody close to me in my life go through it. We, eventually started connecting with others. We formally went into research and development with about 100 women across the country, brought on some great fertility doctors. We spent about a year doing nothing other than listening and learning, and really wanting to
Wow.
validate where those key pain points across the journey were, which, we could get deeper into it, but eventually led us to putting a flag in the ground and saying we wanted to create the first consumer brand that was not only going to develop, solutions to make this journey more comfortable, more supported, but also build a brand that I think for the first time people going through such deep struggles could feel seen and heard in, because prior to Dandy that hadn't existed. So definitely a personal and emotional journey to first be exposed to this experience and then build something to try and improve it.
Well, I did see that you spent a whole year just listening to potential customers, and I wanted to ask you about that. You got into it a little bit already. How crucial was that research phase? You said that you started working with 100 women. How did you find those people in the first place? And what did you learn during this whole year? And how did you basically keep the um, discipline to not do anything for a whole year, but just listen?
Uh, the discipline was one of the hardest parts because you're dealing with people that need help now and they need it in a very material way. And frankly, as we started to take in a little bit of capital, we had investors that were pushing us to bring things to market and start generating sales and revenue. So I think that discipline was hard, but critically important. Let me back up maybe to some of the preceding questions. We found the women very, very organically. We relied heavily on social media. Thankfully, although a lot of fertility struggles is still stigmatized and a lot of it is still kept behind closed doors, thankfully there's been progress in how many women are starting to talk about and are starting to share their journeys and are starting to de-isolate and advocate for better care and better solutions. And there is an extraordinarily vibrant community, although it's quite insulated. Once you're in it, it's a very vibrant community. And through social media, primarily Instagram, we were able to find a lot of women that were very passionate about sharing their experiences. Some of them were going through it in real time. Others had been through it and now kind of had this pay it forward mentality of like, I want to be part of this community to help make it better for the next generation of women that are going to go through it. And we take a very, very kind of hand-to-hand approach of reaching out one-to-one, explaining what we were building and why we were building it. Hopefully we broke through kind of somebody's inbox and they would respond. We would move from that response over to suggesting a Zoom call like this, and really wanting to take, again, a very personal, empathetic approach to wanting to hear each woman's journey, their story, their pain points. And we were fortunate that we were building something, again, in a space where, not only is help critically needed, but it really hadn't existed before. So we weren't just another consumer brand building another hair care product or another cosmetics or a new shoe. We were building something different and differentiated. And I think it resonated with enough women such that they kind of had this mentality of how can I get involved? How can I help? How can my story be useful to what you guys are going to go on to build? And, we built kind of a WhatsApp community group to start around it, where all of a sudden, not only were we interacting with these women to learn from them, but we were actually facilitating peer-to-peer support. And it was this amazing dynamic of women who had been through it, women who were going through it, helping each other. At the same time, they're helping us, and they're starting to feel seen and heard, and like their experiences were becoming part of something that, again, a brand for the first time was trying to create solutions for. So it was this very kind of grassroots, organic approach, but I think what underpinned it all was empathy. We got on a call face-to-face with every single woman. We didn't take shortcuts. We wanted them to know our stories and kind of why we were doing this. And I think anytime you're willing to put yourself out there as a founder and tell a little bit more of your story, I think in today's day and age, like more than ever, that means something to people, that resonates with people. And I think it creates more investment in a brand and wanting to be part of that. So that was kind of the underpinnings. And then, eventually women told other women and the community started to grow. So it was a very kind of personal approach. As for what we learned a lot. I mean, there was some macro trends, right, which I kind of already stated, which is the number one was that this is probably the hardest thing I'll ever go through in my life. And number two was, as I mentioned, I feel like I don't really have the resources and support that I need to get me through it. And that was both physically, right? Like there was this notion of like, there's physical things I could use, products and hardware that could help make some of the physical journey less painful, more intuitive. But there's also obviously the huge kind of bucket of emotional support, trustworthy information, guidance to take this process that can be incredibly complicated and distressing and so many twists and turns. We heard from so many women that their primary resource was Google, Facebook groups, or Reddit forums, right? And so with everything at stake, women are kind of forced to rely on information that's not medically credible, it's not personalized to their journey. And we felt like there was just a huge opportunity to help solve for some of that as well. So we kind of, I won't walk through each pain point, but there was like about 6 core pain points that we distilled it down to. Some of them physical, some of them mental and emotional. All of them we felt like we had an opportunity to kind of roll into building the first support system, which sits at the intersection of both physical products and digital services, to show up for women kind of at each point of their fertility journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a fellow entrepreneur, I find it remarkable that you were able to resist not building anything for a whole year after just a few calls saying, okay, now I understand what needs to be built in like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and then 1 month later, MVP is ready to go. I mean, in 1 whole year, I applaud your discipline. It's actually a lot harder than it sounds, everybody who's listening. But now I want to kind of go in there a little bit more. You mentioned investors were getting antsy. So I looked at your LinkedIn. It looks like 2021 was the date, I guess, year Dandi was founded. But then I saw the pre-seed funding in 2023. So 1 year of conversations. When you raised the funding, was there a prototype or something, or was it just raised on an idea? I mean, since it was pre-seed, I guess there was no traction expectation or anything.
Yeah, so 2021 was kind of the genesis of like idea, community building, starting to kind of validate the problem and better inform what we wanted to go out and build around the problem. 2022 was kind of kicking off, pre-seed capital raise. We closed majority of that round like in 2022, rolling a
Hmm.
little bit into 2023. Some of the, PR around it came out a little bit later. Um, but as far as like where we were in the business relative to raising that round, we didn't have a prototype yet. We didn't have a physical prototype. Again, we had been through exhaustive research and development. We had brought on a wonderful, wonderful industrial design team that is an all-female studio based out of San Francisco. They designed beloved consumer products. They worked on the Fitbit and Tempo Workout Studio. And they were very close to this cause, and they brought a tremendous amount of empathy and care to how we took these ideas and the problems and started to convert them into actual product solutions. Based on a lot of the industrial design work we did with them, we were able to go out and raise money, basically explaining, the size of this market, the depth of the problem, the solutions that we were going to bring to market, and some really really great industrial designs and renderings. But we didn't yet have like a real 3D prototype. These are pretty exhaustive products. We couldn't replicate things that existed before. I mean, the whole novelty of the Dandi IVF Care Kit is we design products that at large had never existed before. So whereas if you're playing in a different product category, you could sometimes develop a prototype a little bit easier off something that exists. We didn't really have that luxury. So we really needed the pre-seed capital to empower us to go out and start creating those prototypes and then testing and refining those prototypes.
Hmm. Well, a San Francisco-based, well-known industrial design agency who worked on Fitbit doesn't sound very cheap. How did you guys afford that?
Well, we had a little bit of early capital. And mind you, right, like we started to raise, interestingly, as venture markets started to turn, right? For many years, we kind of lived in this world of, let's just call it more available, readily accessible capital. And we kind of kicked off our raise as markets were starting to turn a little bit. Venture was starting to tighten up. So before we kind of opened up any venture conversations, we had a few early investors, a couple angels that had been impacted by fertility struggles that were very passionate, and a family office similarly that was impacted, that understood what we were building. So the beginning of our pre-seed really seeded us to go out and bring this industrial design team on, bring on a research scientist that helped us through some of our early R&D work. So we had a little bit of capital to kind of seed us and get going and kind of bridge that gap to enable us to produce a little bit more work that really supported going out and raising the rest of our pre-seed.
Hmm. Jake, you were motivated by the struggles of a family member. How did you meet your co-founder, Layla? I guess she was already in healthcare. How did you decide that two of us should work on this together? And how did your backgrounds? You were at WeWork before. You said how did your backgrounds complement each other in building Dandy?
Yeah, so Layla's the clinical piece of this business, right? She was a fertility nurse for a decade at a leading fertility clinic here in New York. She also, as it turns out, was a fertility patient as well. So she kind of lived the patient experience and kind of saw it from both sides, both clinically, and again, bringing a lot of empathy from the patient side of this. What she saw in the clinic was that even, some of the best fertility clinics, right, are not built to provide the type of personalized care that patients needed. And so she actually left the clinical space to build her own fertility concierge business because she actually felt she could impact and support patients with more personalized care outside of the clinic than she could inside the clinic. And so she built a thriving business that she operated for about 8 years, doing nothing other than providing personalized, medically credible, on-demand support to women, outside of the clinic, and really helping to keep them on track every step of the way. Again, in ways that clinics simply are not built to. as we were focused a lot on developing these products, in the back of our mind, we always knew we wanted to be a business that sat at the intersection of physical products and digital health. We knew that products, while definitely solving some of the acute physical discomfort of this experience, which is very important because it's a big problem. Again, there's this whole gap of information and trustworthy guidance and support along the way. And so early on, we knew we wanted to pair products with digital health. Now, we didn't know if that was going to be productizing community itself. We didn't know if that was going to be virtual care. We had investors that were really interested in us building out a content library and monetizing really quality content to guide you. So we had some different ideas. And as we were kind of developing our products and getting further and further along, we kept hearing about this kind of mythical woman, Layla, who's helping all these patients outside of the clinic. And everybody just had, really kind of amazing things to say about her. And it was just kind of a marriage made in heaven in that when we met her, again, she had done the clinical thing for about 10 years. She was operating a concierge business now that was doing pretty well. And she was really passionate about scaling it. Her superpower is on the clinical side, right? She is world-class at helping women navigate their journey. And she's this perfect combination of, medically credible meets, the warmth and empathy of feeling like you're working with, your best friend. And so that's her superpower, but she didn't necessarily know how to scale her business. I mean, there was some great things she was doing, and everything was word of mouth, referral based. She hadn't spent $1 on customer acquisition. And we kind of looked at this model of like really personalized but medically credible virtual care, coupled with the fact it didn't exist at scale, really anywhere. And we just said to ourselves, this is the perfect kind of model to pair with our products. And we think it allows us to show up so much more comprehensively for a woman along her fertility journey. If at each step of the way, there's physical products that can cater to that portion of the journey, but there's also virtual care from medical experts that can support you in the ways that you're looking for. And Layla was, really interested in kind of her next step in her journey. And so our skill sets just, kind of merged really beautifully in that I had spent, the better part of my career, building businesses. I built, 2 startups within the broader startup of WeWork. I was, great kind of creatively at curating experience, building brands, pretty good operator as well, and kind of had the acumen to, take lead on some of the, the hard blocking and tackling that's required to build a business and put together your models and sell it to the world and go out and raise capital and figure out, what your go-to-market looks like. And she was, the clinical piece of the business that can provide this wonderful care that can help us build our virtual care platform that, helped us to staff up this team of nurses and get them licensed to provide care in all 50 states. So it was, I think, this really nice marriage of kind of business meets clinical. And, on a personal level, we just, we connected on a lot of things early on, which I think is critically important for any founders going down this path together. So it was, it was serendipitous, and it's been a great journey since.
That's great. It's so hard to find good co-founders in the world of startups. You got lucky finding someone like Layla.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I'm curious about this interesting mix of physical products and digital services that you mentioned. I imagine just building a physical product alone must be challenging enough. Now, having a hybrid model like that must be even more challenging. What are some of the difficulties that you experience? I'm curious about that.
I think the biggest one, right, is really figuring out, priorities and how to spread your bandwidth, right? We're not a huge team. We're a couple co-founders with some really great folks around us working in more kind of part-time fractional capacities, really talented people. But, we don't have a 10, 15, 20 person team. I think so. Every decision you make presents an opportunity cost, and it's this constant analysis of, what is the right sequencing of what we want to bring to market and why. And for us, it's always this balance of like thinking about what's best for the business, but also like hearing from women every day that are kind of reinforcing, the very real areas that they need support here and now. And so sometimes it's challenging to reconcile those two ideas when you're talking to a pretty big population of people that is very vulnerable and making it very clear this is what's needed. But then figuring out, okay, I've got to balance the practicalities of how that fits into my business's roadmap. And so I think that is always kind of the name of the game. It's prioritization. The short answer is it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, and I'm a big believer in just being totally candid and honest. There was investors that looked at what we were building early on, and some thought the intersection of physical product and digital health was kind of the future of consumer, and some didn't want to get near it because they felt like we were building two disparate businesses. And you talk about discipline. We were disciplined and steadfast in our view that, particularly for this category and this human experience, that one or the other didn't solve it, and we needed to sit at the intersection of both. I think the hardest thing and the biggest challenge, to your question, was, having enough bandwidth and having the right focus. And there were days and nights and weeks where we'd go into sprints on virtual care, and all of a sudden the products would start to lag a little bit, and vice versa. So just staying on top of it all, as kind of cliche or basic as that sounds, I mean, that was the hardest part in all of it.
Mm-hmm. Jake, how do you describe your product to somebody new that you just met?
I describe it as something that brings comfort, accuracy, and mental and emotional peace of mind to a very difficult injection process that is IVF. And in a future state, I think there's opportunities to kind of extrapolate what we've built into other areas of injectables and care, and we've been approached on some of those opportunities already. But yeah, it's focused on physical care, comfort, and accuracy and peace of mind, because there's a lot of mental and emotional distress that surrounds injections beyond the physical discomfort that I think most people would associate with injections. And with all that's at stake, with $7,000 worth of medications you might be injecting into yourself, and the efficacy of your injections determining whether or not you're going to be able to bring a child into the world, mentally and emotionally, it's hard to, I think, describe what that feels like, right? And so, physical products that could start to, yes, support the physical side of it, but also create a sense that you're supported, and that, there's peace of mind in this process as you go through it, is invaluable. And again, that's not me telling you it as someone that's been through it. That's me telling you it as someone that listened to hundreds of patients describe that to me, and why we went out and built those products, and why we built, the adjacent virtual care that also helps to take women through that injection process.
Mm-hmm. IVF has been in the news a lot lately. Like literally right now, if you go to NewYorkTimes.com, it's on top of the homepage with the election coming up. There's an IVF related news item. So this puts you in the middle of a very interesting situation. How has this affected your business, and how do you navigate those tricky waters?
I think it's called more attention to it, right? Like anytime, women's reproductive rights, become, at the forefront of, presidential campaigns, and you have, I don't care what your political views are, but you've got, presidential candidates talking about this on prime time, whether it's a side that's against it and is attacking reproductive rights, or a side that says this is something we should be fighting for. And, recently you may be aware, Tim Walz came out and said, this is something that I went through with my wife. We actually went through IVF, so I have a personal tie to this. I think it is, while it's scary, in my opinion, and I try and stay out of the politics of it, while I think it's scary for those that are attacking, reproductive rights, I do think ultimately it's a tailwind that people are talking about it at this scale. And so anytime you have, politicians talking about it and celebrities talking about it, regardless of which side it is, and then you have, media picking up those conversations and amplifying those conversations, ultimately it is inevitably bringing more awareness to a category, to a space that, again, not to keep going back to the numbers, but we're talking about something that's impacting 20% of the global population, right? This isn't a small issue. And yet disproportionately, it's not even close to big enough part of the collective conversation, in my opinion, relative to how many people it is impacting. So I think the politics of it all, while we could certainly, offline get into, how I feel about the politics. We try and stay out of the politics. Our North Star is helping people through these experiences. When we know they're in need, the politics will resolve themselves. But I think more than anything, it's a headwind in continuing to bring more awareness and more attention to an important conversation.
Mm-hmm. I find it so interesting how companies tackle this, because it's almost impossible to stay away from political situations. Like my last 3 recordings, all 3 of them were, in political waters. The first one was Morning After Pill. That company is embracing the politics. Previous one before you was electric cars. They're trying to be agnostic, even though like a company like Rivian, for instance, they are like the anti-Tesla now because of like political. And then in your case, you're saying that you try to kind of stay neutral and kind of look at it from a health perspective. But it's kind of funny now. I'm thinking, well, what my next call is going to be,
Yeah, I mean, look,
it's like everything is in there now somehow.
And look, some of it's I think a human thing. I mean, you also have to follow your heart a little bit. I'm somebody, not to digress, but just in life. I mean, I'm concerned with how politicized seemingly every topic has become, right? And this is not about my business, it's not about fertility. It's hard to talk about many things today without them somewhat becoming politicized, and I think that prevents progress and open-mindedness to a whole host of topics. And so in general, like in my life, I try and approach conversations by the merit of the conversation and not through a lens of politics. And it concerns me and it scares me, the direction we've headed as a society, and that seemingly, again, almost every conversation has somehow become politicized, which polarizes the conversation. It makes it really hard to have meaningful conversations. So, that's kind of my position in general. So as I think about a business, putting aside what may be the right thing to do for the growth of the business, I want to own that idea of, hey, not everything needs to become politicized, and even if in American politics this is a hot topic, how do we have a conversation about it in a way that isn't starting from a place of politics? And how can we create more open-minded conversation while trying to move it a little bit away from politics? So that's just my, a little bit also of me kind of following my heart in my position on, I think the world needs to try and move a little bit away from the polarization that, politics seems to bring to most conversations.
Your head of community is an Olympian, Tara Lipinski. That's a pretty big name to have on board. How did that connection happen? Can you tell me the story of what happened there?
Yeah, similar to what I described earlier in that, this is a vibrant community, and it, infertility and IVF, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're an Olympic athlete, if you're a celebrity who's got 50 million followers on Instagram, or you're, an everyday person like me or you or whoever. It doesn't discriminate. And, the interesting thing is, I think no matter what walk of life you come from, when you go through this experience, there's a certain, again, emotional connection you develop to it. And especially for those who have been through it and are maybe in a position to give back and to use their platform to create more awareness, to advocate for others. People are doing it. And Tara is just an example of someone who went through an extraordinary multi-year fertility journey, a lot of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of hardship. And she's used her platform since then. She started a podcast, on social media. She's very active. And so we just kind of DM'd her one day and said, look, we love how you talk about this. We love your vulnerability and how you share your experience. And, we think we're like-minded in what we're trying to achieve. And let's get on a call and see if there's a way to partner. And, sure enough, we hit it off on the first call. And, community is her bread and butter. That's what she's really passionate about. Community, similarly, for us was really the foundation of how we built this business, and I think will always remain our North Star. And so there's this, beautiful marriage of, well, why don't you head up our community and do what you do best, and help us to continue to grow and build and learn with this amazing community. And a couple months in, and she's done some amazing things, for this community in partnership with Dandi, and we've got some really interesting things lined up with her over the next few months. So yeah, really just kind of organic, again, based on a very personal experience that she had been through, that we had been through, and just kind of aligning on a shared mission.
Mm-hmm. I find that so interesting. Normally, a relationship that would have been a celebrity influencer or ambassador relationship turns into a head of community. It's really fascinating. Well, let's talk about partnerships for a second. So you, I guess, work with or try to partner with fertility clinics or pharmacies, I imagine. What are your ideal partners?
Yeah, both. We're fortunate enough to kind of sit at the intersection of, consumer, right? So we've got a direct to consumer portion of our business, which again relies heavily on kind of community and organic marketing. We actually are yet to spend a dollar on paid marketing on the consumer side of our business. And then,
You
again,
have
we're
not spent a dollar.
not a dollar.
Wow.
Not a dollar. And again, I attribute that to our community. We're fortunate to be building a space where you have so many passionate, amazing, incredible women that want to be a part of this. It's a unique, point in time for the fertility industry. And we're fortunate. And again, our driving kind of force was always we're going to be the first consumer brand in this space that makes these women feel seen and heard for the first time that haven't had that. So we've relied on that, and we've done a lot of organic marketing with this community and a whole ambassador program we built out that I could tell you more about if interesting. But as a result of that, we haven't yet invested any paid marketing. And then, the other side of our business, is kind of, we just kind of think about it as B2B. It could be technically B2B to C, but essentially, if you look at the landscape of, the entities that exist that are engaging with patients, whether it's a clinic, right? So where the patient is going to see a doctor and be prescribed a medical protocol, often IVF, or, one step after that, now I'm going through IVF, so I need my needles and I need my meds, so I'm going to go to this specialty pharmacy that's going to send me this very complicated box of needles and medications through the mail. Most patients get it. They don't really know what to do with it. Again, the distress sets in. They were looking for, similarly, ways to better service and care for their patients. And so as we were building this business, while we were pitching investors, we were also out pitching some of the biggest clinic networks, some of the biggest fertility pharmacies, and most of them, not all of them, but most of them were pretty eyes wide open to the gaps in care that existed and saw opportunity to kind of, partner with us to expand their offering, create a better patient experience. And then there's also some very tangible ways we're helping them. Just as a quick stat for you, Bora, clinics deal with a very, very heavy volume of after-hours calls and portal messages. There's a stat that close to 90% of those are tied to injection support. So patients at 8, 9, 10 o'clock are injecting themselves, something goes wrong, or they're not sure, they have a question, they're now trying to get in touch with their clinic, they can't. Long story short, these clinics, it creates a major administrative burden where they're either trying to service staff that are responding after hours. Generally, they come in the next morning, they have all these portal messages to get through, and it pulls them away from kind of in-clinic patient care. And part of our message to them is like, yes, we're going to help your patients, which is why we exist, but we also can augment your care, and we could be the team that's showing up for them after hours with, again, products and services, such that you don't need to get 100, calls a day after hours, portal messages. We could get ahead of that. And so I think the clinics and the pharmacies are, interested in how we can help their patient population, but I think they're also looking at startups like ours that are developing innovative solutions that I think could solve for some of the operational problems that at times they're facing.
That's such an interesting angle to engage those partners by removing work from their plate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real thing, and look, it's not what we set out to build. But again, as we started going into R&D, and we brought on two medical advisors, two big fertility doctors, here in New York, one at CCRM, one at Cornell. They kind of put the idea in our head, like, you guys are building something great. Like, this will probably, hopefully, be successful with consumers, but like, you guys should be talking to clinics. Like, a lot of them are archaic. Clinics, right, are notorious for being just that. They're clinical, right? They don't have innovative solutions for how you think about, almost that white glove concierge personalized care. And I came from a hospitality background, and I spent the first, 7 or 8 years of my career, both in hotels and then at WeWork, looking at the world through experience. And how do you build, experience that is going to, connect and resonate with someone on a deep level. And so when you look at the experience that is the clinic, it's like, it's the antithesis. And I spend time, by the way, I went into clinics and I sat in the waiting room. I wanted to know what the energy in that waiting room felt like, for 45 minutes, and what color were the walls painted and what music was playing, and how are the clinics catering to these patients as they're sitting in their most distressed moments, waiting to see their doctor, facing the uncertainty of bringing a child into the world. And you get really into the nuts and bolts of experience and understanding what the standard of care is in these clinics. You can start to develop some compelling narratives around, hey, clinic, like, you focus on what you're good at, which is medical protocols. Here are some ways we think we could help you around experience in patient care. So that was kind of a serendipitous, it's not, we didn't set out to be a B2B company, but it's something that's emerged, and I think will continue to allow us to help clinics, but also meet patients, where they're at in their journey. So it's been kind of a nice early finding.
Well, now that you mentioned it, bringing that years of empathy that you gained through your hospitality experience into a healthcare startup must be an advantage for you, for sure. I can definitely see that happening. It's a good mix. You mentioned ambassadors. I'd love to hear more about that. What do you look for in ambassadors?
We look for women that are passionate about this space, that have either been impacted by this experience and want to help bring some good into the space. I'd say equally, our ambassador program is comprised of women that are about to go through it, and they're about to embark upon this set of challenges. And rather than doing it the old way, which is under-resourced and under-supported, fortunately enough of them are hearing about Dandi, and they're reaching out and saying, hey, could I use your products and showcase on my platform how these products are helping me through my injections? Or could I do a consultation with you or a live injection support session with one of your nurses, and similarly showcase and help to educate other women out there how these resources could help them along their journey. So it's been just kind of a organic program where it's either women that have been through this and want to kind of pay it forward, again, give back. But now we're starting, as our brand starts to get a little bit bigger and there's a little bit more awareness that we exist, it's actually a lot of women. We're getting several kind of inbound messages a day now from women saying, hey, I'm about to go through this. I'm scared. I'm concerned. I don't know what to expect. Can I partner with Dandi to document, share some of my experience, and help to create some more awareness? So, it's great, and I think it's unconventional. Most ambassador programs are a little bit, I think, more transactional, a little bit more pay to play. We have the benefit of helping women in real time with things they're actually going through, and kind of empowering them to share it, to talk about it. We don't provide scripts. We don't say, this is what you should go tell the world. We want it to be organic, authentic. And I think in today's day and age, where consumers are flooded with, advertisements and paid ads and just such oversaturation, I think, letting it feel organic and authentic, and I think most consumers can tell when it really is that, has worked for us and will always be our North Star, I think. So we've thought about ambassador as really just a term that encompasses, I think, organic partnership, helping people, and in turn them helping us to create more education and awareness around Dandi and how we're trying to better show up for women along their fertility journeys.
Jake, final question. Top 2 problems giving you a headache right now, and top 2 priorities for the year.
Top 2 problems giving me a headache. I'd say, if I'm being honest, bandwidth is absolutely one of them. We're still a lean team, and I think you hear about a lot of startups that have these huge raises and huge teams, and they have the luxury of delegating across a lot of personnel. We're still in that stage where we're seeing some great early traction, but we're a lean team. So bandwidth and kind of managing priorities, as I mentioned, and staying focused on the right things at the right time is probably number 1. Number 2, I don't know if this is a problem or an opportunity, but we talked about consumer, we talked about B2B. We're kind of intensely focused right now on where we want to make some bigger bets, right? And is it kind of going direct to consumer, or is it doubling down on a lot of the early B2B success we've seen with clinics and pharmacies? So a bit of a problem, a bit of an opportunity, something we're working through. And what was the second 2, or what, Bora?
Top 2 priorities for the year.
Well, I probably just named one, B2B expansion. It's the quickest way for us to kind of meet patients at the moment they need us. So I think B2B expansion is one. And though it's probably not sexy, we are going to set out, before end of the year to raise our next round of capital to fuel a lot of the growth and expansion opportunities that we're seeing kind of in the here and now. So that will definitely be a priority for us over the next, 3 to 5 months.
Jake, thank you so much for sharing your journey with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great. I appreciate it.